So I went into the field and I did my discovery. They'd hired me to find, okay, can we do this better than we did this in the pilot? So as I'm there, what I discover is that they played games with clients. They were tricking people, and they were being salesy, yes. They would say, look, unless you buy this toilet, there's going to be a government inspector coming behind me and they're going to fine you, and they're going to take your cow. And I swear, there was a direct quote from the head sales manager there. But he says, we have to lie in order to sell. My eyes got so... like, did you just say that? Is this a translation problem or whatever? Oh, God.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Scott Roy. Now, Scott's the CEO at Whitten Roy Partnership and co-author with Roy Whitten of a new book titled Sell Well, Do Good, Decision Intelligence Selling for Social Enterprises. In our conversation today, we're talking about something very different, which is selling in non-commercial settings. I said, this is not a topic we talk about a lot or at all. But we're going to dive into the importance of effective selling systems and processes to many social enterprises. Now, we often hear about people and companies that are working in developing countries to improve agriculture production with, let's say, pest-resistant crops, or increasing access to clean water supplies, or improve general health through access to effective sanitation systems. And as Scott shares, the success of all these programs depends on, to some large extent, on effective selling. He shares some fascinating stories about how effective selling systems help social enterprises in developing countries to become self-sustaining and to be able to fulfill their missions of serving more people. So as Scott and I get into it, we're talking about selling in ways that truly have an impact on the lives of the people involved. So we get into this and much, much more. But before we get to Scott, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing by leaving us a review. We'd certainly appreciate it. All right, let's jump into it.
Scott, welcome to the show, or should I say welcome back to the show?
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. I'm glad to be back. Good to see you again.
And you're joining us from where again?
I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee today. So I just got back from a rather lengthy trip. I've been gone for 5 weeks and just got back from Southeast Asia, where I was located for some work.
Yeah, so we're gonna dive into that. But you were in Cambodia, said, for 5 weeks, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's a lovely country. I've spent, I think over the last 14 years, I've spent about 3 years of my life there.
Really?
The last time I calculated it. Yeah. So it's a place I'd love to go to for work. I mean, for work or for pleasure, quite frankly.
Sure.
But it's mostly for work now that I go. So.
And you were saying this was your first venture, sort of post-pandemic, or not post-pandemic, but since the start of the pandemic.
Yeah. We're mid-pandemic now, as apparently. Yeah, actually, I've been traveling back and forth to London since last August.
Okay.
Because you probably don't remember this, my wife and daughter live primarily in England, and then I live primarily in the United States, just because I enjoy living here more than England. And not to offend any English people, it's just I like a little more space. And so anyway, I've been back and forth, I think probably about 7 or 8 times over the last year. But this last trip, I actually flew to Cambodia, and it was quite an experience going through all the different airports that are empty. I mean, these, like Seoul in South Korea, beautiful airport, and it's like they only have 40 flights a day, if that. And it's just cavernous. It was just such a dystopian experience, So, but the flight was great, except you have to wear a mask the whole time. So,
yeah, on those long flights. But the interesting, because I've been flying more recently, and going back and forth to New York, and I mean, airports are as full as at the peak, but they certainly seem pretty busy.
Well, the American airports are. There's no question about that. And I mean, when I was flying in and out of Heathrow, I mean, literally, they only had, I think, out of that terminal, I think they had 30 flights a day. And, I mean, Heathrow's just hundreds and hundreds of flights a day.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I remember being in the British Airways lounge, if you've ever been there in London.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so in the business lounge, which is huge.
Yep.
And there were 3 people in the lounge in the morning. Three people, including me. And I had that several times where that happened. And it was like weird. I mean, walking through completely empty, massive buildings, So anyway, that's I think internationally it's just a different ball game right now.
Yeah, and the last point is the British Airways business class lounge and Heathrow has great food.
It does, absolutely. Yeah. I love it because when you're in the terminal, you go through the first class section there because of a certain status with flying.
Yes.
And then you're allowed to go right in through a special sort of place where they've got security, and it's only a handful of people go through it there at a time, and then you just go right into the lounge. It's spectacular. One of my favorite places. For those that fly a lot, so.
Yeah, I was going to say, for those that fly a lot, it's funny. I haven't, because I think I'm part of the pandemic, is one thing you don't see or hear as much as, so.
Sure.
War stories about business travel in the last.
That's right. That's right.
It's nice to start thinking about it again. I mean, I went 15 months without flying, and I think I calculated that was, I almost hate to say how long it was since I'd gone that long without being on an airplane, but it was a really long time. So.
Yeah. Well, last year when we had been skiing in Italy, I mean, talk about fate, really waving a red rag in front of a raging bull. I flew into Italy to meet with our director of marketing who lives in Italy, in Milan area, right? Mm-hmm. I fly in there on the 13th of February last year, right into basically ground zero, Lombardy, and then we went skiing for a week afterwards. So I was there like 10 days in northern Italy, and then left, and then I said goodbye to my wife and daughter. They flew back to London. I flew back to the United States, and literally I didn't see them again for 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was, quite an experience. We all have our stories, don't we? So.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's, especially in that type of separation, Zoom doesn't really fill the bill. I mean, it's better than nothing, but yeah.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, last time you were here, which I think was last year, 2020.
Yes, about now, actually. Yeah. Just about now.
We were talking about your book, Decision Intelligence Selling. You've written with your co-author, Roy Whitten, who joined us last time. Where's Roy today?
Roy is in the beginning stages of retirement. He's 74 now. And he's in great shape. He's got a lot of life in him left, but it's time for him to spend more time with his grandkids. And so over the last year, he's been slowing down a little bit.
With 5-week trips to Cambodia, not as high a priority list for him these days.
Well, he doesn't do that stuff. I'm the one who goes to.
You do that, okay?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the guy who goes to the developing countries. So.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah. Well, you've got a new book we're going to talk about, which called Sell Well, Do Good, which is applying your decision intelligence selling for social enterprises, which is fascinating because you've always had an element of that to your work.
Yeah, actually, it's really sort of at least interesting to me and to Roy, because we started as sales consultants in London back in 2009 is when we started our firm, and I'd had an experience, and so that selling was all done with, or all the work we did was with B2B organizations. Large companies, a lot of global type companies, and basically that's what the Blue Book, Decision Intelligence Selling, was written for. It was really for B2B selling, for sort of Western markets, that kind of thing. And the new book is written more toward the developing countries where selling happens, but is done for slightly different purpose and different reasons. And so basically we started experimenting with this. I did personally in 2008. And I went to Cambodia, and I was working with an organization there called International Development Enterprises. And I was helping them to develop a sales program for agriculture to sell seeds and very inexpensive implements to poor farmers, rice farmers that would live on basically the land. They only had an acre of land basically to raise their very poor families, quite frankly. And so I began working with organizations at the time to help them learn how to sell in order to sell these products at reasonable prices. And then actually when people would buy these implements and things, they would use them more than in the old model where they were just given this stuff by aid agencies. They would use them for a while, then they would throw them away, or they wouldn't really use them at all, you say. And so what happened in philanthropy about 20 years ago was there was this move toward using business as the way to deliver services to the poor. And if the poor would and we're talking about really poor people, they would buy a latrine or buy a water filter or buy seeds. And, like anyone, we know that when people buy with their own money, they're invested. They're likely going to take care of what they invest their money in. And so that's the secret to social enterprise and why selling is such an important part of that.
Well, it's fascinating when you think about it, because you're talking about people who are, in the case of like the example you're giving, practicing subsistence agriculture.
Yeah.
And I imagine there aren't a lot of, enterprises, whether it's an NGO or whatever, how you classify these organizations, out there providing the tools and the seeds and the things they need. And so it's interesting, and reading through the book and some of the examples, it's like, you can sort of see where, philanthropically, in the past, maybe it was a grant of some sort or,
that's right.
But where does it's just fascinating to think about it. So tell people where the selling part comes in, because you're selling to people that basically sort of don't have a lot of choice.
Right. Well, so basically, this idea of supplanting or replacing philanthropy, just giving stuff away, like building a toilet, for example. They've done this in India for years, where they've gone in and spent millions, even billions of dollars building toilets in India for people who tend to do open defecation. That's how they take care of themselves.
Right.
And so they would build these latrines, and then they would go back and find that the farmers and these families weren't using them at all. They continued to go to the bathroom out in the field. And they they looked at what was inside the bathroom was there, and that's where they started storing like their hay and the food for the animals and stuff like that. It was like a building to them.
Sure.
And so that's the problem with giveaways, is that oftentimes people who receive don't really appreciate what it is that's been given to them. And they really haven't bought in, literally. They haven't bought into the idea of using a toilet, you say. So really what's happened in the developing world over the last 20 years is this concept of organizations who serve the poor. And this can be, as you say, NGOs, or it can be a small business that has a social mission or purpose, what we often call a social enterprise. The mission they're on is more important than the profit, or at least as important as the profit is concerned.
Right.
And so by selling to the poor, two things happen. Number one is the poor will buy what they really want and then use it, and that's really key is to buy it and use it. Because that's how their lives improve. That's how their health improves. That's how, their livelihoods can be improved, or their life be improved. You say, so in many different ways. But the second thing is that it generates income for the organization that does the selling. So therefore, it makes them less reliant on being grant funded. You say. And so therefore they have a little bit more self-determination in their ability to decide how they're going to go to market, you say. So the development approaches where you give stuff away versus selling and building a business have very, very different ways of thinking. I mean, very, very different ways that you would build organizations like that. And so therefore, I mean, we've been spending a lot of time working with organizations that are coming out of the giveaway model, and they want to go over to the to the for-profit model, because there's so many benefits to it, of creating some of that independence for themselves, as well as being able to, do good that really sticks, where people buy in and they buy it and they use it.
So give us an example of, companies that are making that transition.
Sure, absolutely. In fact, I was on the phone just yesterday with an organization called Water for People. Okay, now Water for People is a charity. They receive grant funding. They're based out of Denver, Colorado. They work in 9 countries around the world, 3 in Africa, or I guess it's 8 countries, 3 in Africa, 3 in Central America, 2 in South America. And we were talking about the challenges they're facing with moving, because they do a lot of work with market-based, what they call market-based solutions or private sector solutions, which is essentially, making markets work for the poor, basically. So what they do is they get in and they work with all of the different actors. So this could be people who are producing a toilet, let's say, and then
what they're selling is Water for People. What's their product or service that they're selling?
Yeah, what they're doing is they're literally working on the value chain to connect the different actors so that it provides services that can be sold then to the poor. So Water for People literally isn't selling anything. What they're doing is they're building the value chain. You say building the value chain that actually delivers these products to the poor, provides a way to pay for them, make sure there is service or repair that's available to them, et cetera. You say, so if you buy a toilet, for example, who's going to build it? Who's going to then maintain it? Who's going to take care of the fecal sludge when it builds up and you've got to empty your silo? That kind of thing. And then when you want to improve on that, how are you going to do that? Well, and how do you pay for it? Well, you've got to borrow money from somebody, and so that's what a microfinance institute might be. So it's all these different actors in the market are all disjointed in developing countries, and what organizations like Water for People are doing are pulling and creating these value chains, you see, that then serve the poor and do it more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, sort of supply chain, even, you might say.
Yeah, supply chain, same thing. Yeah, same value chain, supply chain.
And then, so what is Water for People selling then?
Well, they're literally the nonprofit organization that is doing all of this work, you say. So they're grant funded. They're not selling anything except the ideas. I mean, they certainly are selling. They're selling each of these actors on why they need to trust each other, why, the end result is going to be worth the effort, why the MFI should be, why the microfinance institution should be lending the money to the poor, et cetera. All of those are sales being made. It's influence that's being made in order to bring this all together. Otherwise, it wouldn't change. You say, so that's what they're in it. But what they need is they need to have employees that don't think like an NGO. They need employees that think like business people. You say, so that would be an example of moving from sort of an NGO mentality or a charity mentality over into a business mentality where you're really thinking about, how do I help this organization make a profit? How do I help them, alleviate the constraints that are going on in their business so that they can actually succeed? You say, so that requires somebody who understands how business works.
Yeah. So how does, in that environment then, and maybe we just take a step back,
Sure.
How do they, or how are you helping them sort of apply the principles, what you called your decision intelligence, into the work they're doing? So maybe just start by taking a step back and telling people, reviewing for them, if they didn't listen to the previous episode, what decision intelligence is, and then how we're working to incorporate this type of sales intelligence into the work of these nonprofits and NGOs.
Sure. Well, basically, as you know, decision intelligence is all about helping buyers make the very best possible buying decision, as opposed to the type of selling that is so often characterized on television, and in fact that many people do, which is just pitching and persuading and arm twisting and selling ice to Eskimos and all that kind of stuff. And what decision intelligence selling is it really is it starts not with a solution that we're trying to get you to buy, but it starts with the problem that you have that you may be fully aware of or only partially aware of, and maybe not aware of at all. But you want to that once you become aware of it, you're going to want to solve it. You say, and so and you do that by exploring two major topics. One is, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and really understanding at a much deeper level That's what the salesperson does who sells with decision intelligence approach. And then once the client understands the depth of the problem and what it is costing them, literally financially, then the simple question is the problem painful enough and is it costly enough that I want to do something about it? And then that's when we come in with a solution. If we have a solution. If we don't, then we can point them in a direction of where they can find somebody who can do a solution for them. Or you can craft your own solution or provide the solution you have that is going to solve that client's problem and give a good return on investment. And so how that's used and how we use that in the developing world, or just like in the commercial world, is that every interaction you have where you're trying to get somebody either to buy something or you're wanting to influence them to take an action and commit to that action, they can follow that decision intelligence pathway. And so what we do is we get into organizations, we find where their problems are with achieving either one of those goals of either selling more products or getting organizations to change their behavior and say, yes, I want to do that, and I'm committed to doing that. I'm a partner, I'm bought in. And so we teach organizations how to implement that type of a selling process in their organization. Because quite frankly, Andy, what's happened is that all of the stuff that we think about, from pitching and persuading and all the ugly stuff about selling, the manipulative stuff, has made its way into the developer. It's there. It's already there, And when we go in, I tell you a quick story. I went to Cambodia one time, and one of my very first clients there was in the sanitation business, okay? Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had given them $7 million. World Bank had given them $500,000. The Stone Family Foundation had given them $2.5 million. So they had $9 million. They were going in there and they were going to install 70,000 toilets with a market-based sanitation program where they were going to sell toilets. Now, they had done a pilot to prove the concept, and that's why they got this big scale-up money. And so I went into the field and I did my discovery. They'd hired me to find, okay, can we do this better than we did this in the pilot? So as I'm there, what I discover is that they played games with clients. They were manipulating. They were tricking people. They were saying, look, if you don't buy this toilet,
being salesy is what I call it.
They were being salesy. Yes, that's right. If they would say, look, unless you buy this toilet, there's going to be a government inspector coming behind me, and they're going to fine you, and they're going to take your cow. That kind of game, And right. I swear, there was a direct quote from the head sales manager there. I won't say his name because I want to embarrass him. But he says, we have to lie in order to sell. And I went, my eyes got so like, did you just say that? Is this a translation problem or whatever?
Well, it's a problem throughout the world. Yes.
Yeah. So, and there are lies, and then there are, sort of, half truths, which I think probably more salespeople are into rather than bold-faced lies. But I don't know. We could argue about that. But anyway, I basically told the organization what I found, and they were just absolutely blown away. They were so upset. They had no idea that this was going on. And so anyway, they hired us, and we gave the guy a break. We said, look, you can keep your job, but you can't lie anymore, And so anyway, he says, okay, I'll give it a shot, because it's the only job he had, right? So anyway, he turns out to be this amazing sales manager, and he's still with the organization, 12, 13 years later. And in fact, I just was in the office just the other day in Cambodia and saw him. And he's a big convert, obviously, because he realizes I don't have to lie. I can sell really honestly just by not pitching the product. But if I'll go in and just really help people understand the problem they've got at a really deep level, then what's going to happen is they're going to be motivated to buy. And that's the principle of DQ selling, of selling. And in this case, the reason we wrote the book is because we're tired of seeing so much bad selling in the world, and particularly with organizations that are trying to do good. And so, it just doesn't make any sense, does it? It's like, yeah, we're doing good in the world by misleading people, right?
Well, and it seems interesting. I was thinking about that example, because that's not going to be different than examples we see anywhere else in the developed world. Even is that in that case, the sales manager was going in, talking to, the potential customer, and it seemed like oftentimes when we're selling in the developed world, the salesperson goes in, there's this status mismatch where the customer holds greater status than the seller, but you're talking about an environment where it's almost sort of flipped on its head, right?
That's right. Oftentimes, yeah.
Yeah, and then you sort of, the bully comes out at that point, right? Is, why aren't you doing what I want, and so on.
Yeah. Don't you love your family? Don't you love your family? I mean, that kind of garbage. So, but we found that actually DQ it works really, really well in the commercial world. It works great, but DQ selling works. Decision intelligence selling. We call it DQ, by the way. It's a short for decision intelligence, just like intellectual intelligence.
Dairy Queen.
IQ. Yeah, exactly. Like IQ and EQ. DQ is just short. Yeah.
We've got CQ, curiosity intelligence. We've got RQ, relational intelligence. We got lots of Qs here.
I thought we were being fairly original when we came up with that, but apparently we weren't. But anyway, one of the reasons it works so well in the developing world is because you're really wanting to change behavior, right? I mean, one of my clients one time had quite a large grant to do above the line advertising, which I don't really believe works very well in the developing world anyway.
Well, explain what you mean by that.
Above the line meaning like ads on television or radio ads, that kind of thing, as opposed to the below the line, where you're actually making door-to-door contact or direct selling is what that is. And so I told this woman who was running this program, I said, look, you've got $1,200,000 for above the line or for marketing and advertising. I said, we're bringing you a method where I don't think you're going to need it, is because we're going to be able to stimulate the market, because when somebody makes a sales call on one person or in a group, they're going to take them through the problem that is there to be solved and give an experience to them of that, which is then going to stimulate them to buy. I have confidence in that. And so she said, so she was a bit skeptical about it. She says, look, I'll give you 6 months. It was a 3-year program. And sure enough, 6 months later, she said, I just can't believe this. She said, what am I going to do with this $1 million? I said, well, you could give it to us, but no. I said, well, let's figure out a way to use it. And so we did it through sales incentives for the team. You say, and then all of a sudden, I mean, they were amazing. They actually are the most successful toilet organization in the world. They've sold more toilets than any other organization directly. Amazing. So there's stories like this all over the globe. I mean, literally, we started in Cambodia in 2008, and then in 2012 we went to Africa, and then we began to start. We were just doing this on the side, quite frankly, Andy. I mean, we had our major business, which is business to business, complex selling, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And on the side, we're doing this, and I'm the one doing this. Roy is taking care of the B2B stuff. I'm also in the B2B stuff, and my time goes 5% of my time, and then 10% of, and then 15, and then 20, and then all of a sudden we're invited to speak at conferences and all this. And what's so interesting about this is that we didn't really plan this as being what we wanted to do. It's just there was such a huge void there because the concept of social enterprises selling to do good was so new. Nobody was doing it. Mm-hmm. I mean, we literally, still even today, we are, I think this is true, but we're the lead organization. There's nobody else really organized to our level with 50 consultants and all that to be able to deliver what's being delivered in sales consulting in the developing world. And we're pleased with that. But it comes at a price. We can't charge the rates that we did when we were doing commercial work, but it's very, very satisfying and fulfilling. But about 90% of our work today is in this type of work, and about 10% is still in the commercial sector. Although 2022 will be changing that. We're going to be rebalancing that portfolio and growing our B2B business as well.
Well, one thing that I think is so interesting about the stories and what you're doing, from my perspective, is that, as people listen to the show know, I preach about sales being such a human business first and foremost, is that, this idea that you, regardless of where the customer is located physically and what their circumstances are, making them feel understood is the key to influencing behavior everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's so overlooked. I mean, you talk about pitching and the coercive persuasion and these behaviors I call salesy that buyers find no value in, and they don't work for sellers.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, wow, this really is sort of a core human thing, is people just want to feel understood. And if they feel understood, then they're open to building trust with you and enabling you to influence the choices and decisions they make.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, really great selling, and we've all heard this many, many times, but great selling really starts with great listening and really understanding what the other person's needs really, truly are. And beyond, and what's really important here, and what I think in all the salespeople that I've trained over the years, is that they forget that very quickly when they've done enough sales presentations that they know what's coming at them. As far as they can almost predict what's going to come at them, and so they sort of go to sleep at the wheel of why am I listening in the first place? Is it really for my benefit? Find the need and fill it. I've heard that many times. Actually, what I would say is it's really the greatest benefit of listening very carefully to a client is the impact on the client, as you've illustrated just a moment ago, and that is as the client is listened to well, they then discover the problem. They begin owning the problem at a much deeper and more profound level.
Exactly.
And that's when the magic happens. That's really great selling. When you're able to listen to somebody to the point where they begin to realize what the problem is, they begin to even think about how they're going to solve the problem that they now really want to stop, the problem that they've got. And that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, I look at buying in sort of three phases, right? Is first phase is just as you described. It's what are we trying to do? What's the problem? And what are the outcomes we can achieve by solving the problems? And that has nothing to do with the product.
Yeah.
Right? That's all about understanding what's the most important thing to the buyer. Second part of that is how, right? We've covered the what. Now we're going to go to the how. Okay, how are we going to solve the problem and achieve the outcomes we want?
Sure.
Which is, from a salesperson's perspective, the first phase was listening to really understand what's most important to them. Second phase is about, well, how do I help them get that?
Yeah.
And again, not really specifically about products. It's about options. And then the tertiary concern, the third level decision for the buyer is, okay, well, who are we going to do this with? I mean, sellers get it all backwards, right? We train people, come in and pitch.
Yeah.
Do the who first. And it's like, well, you can't. What are you pitching? You don't even understand what the problem is.
Right. Yeah. I can't tell you the number of times I've had where we've trained. This one guy in particular comes to mind. We were working with a large consulting organization in London, and this guy named Steve had his presentation he was going to go make in a few days. And during one of the breaks, he pulled me aside. He says, what do you think about this? And so he opens up his iPad and he starts showing me his deck. Just the deck of slide after slide about us and how great we are. And and then by the end of the training, when he finally realized that we weren't teaching him how to do that, we were teaching him how to do the exact opposite. He says, I guess I'm going to leave my slide deck at home now. So he did. And in fact, he was, he's done incredibly well. He reached out to me. Actually, he bought Decision Intelligence Selling. He said, finally, my old workbook that I got back in 2011 was falling to pieces.
Right.
And
now I got a new version.
Finally put it in a book, So, yeah.
Well, I guess one question is, and not veering too far away from the original topic, but is changing this fundamental behavior in the sales profession is proving very difficult.
Yeah.
And, we all can acknowledge that the salesiness is not, it's just unproductive, right?
Yeah.
A great book published a year ago, Jonah Berger, called The Catalyst, talks about, people have this universal resistance to being persuaded. Mm-hmm. The research has shown this. So, yet we fundamentally are still training sellers to lead with persuasion.
That's right.
And it's like, how do we really affect change in the profession? Because what's happening, which is no different than really what's happened for a long time, I think it's been amplified by, the way things, just the pace of activity through technology and so on. But it's like, it still doesn't work. It didn't work 50 years ago. It doesn't work now. Now that we've automated the behaviors, they still don't work.
Right.
How do we affect change?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you're really speaking to is the thing that I learned from my business partner, Roy, which is the thing that drives human behavior is attitude, right? And attitude is all based around, beliefs that you have. I mean, and so if you take a look at what we believe about selling and what the world believes about selling, the world believes that selling is about pitching and persuading.
Right.
And the way that targets are set up, it's all based on, how much did you sell this month, the short-term targets, longer-term targets at 3 months, and how do I get people across the line, and how do I get them to sign on the dotted line, and, get the business to run and all that. I mean, that all begs for people to push, persuade, sell hard, get people to act, fast and that kind of thing. And what they don't really understand is that the psychology of it, if they can understand that really the more I listen to you and I understand the problem you're trying to solve, and the more I help you to understand what it's costing you not to solve it, with each day that passes, as soon as that's in place, all the motivation to close the sale is already there. All the energy that you need to have that sale cross the line in the right time, in the right way, in the right size, that's all in place. But the problem is that people jump into pitching in the beginning without defining the problem. There's no urgency at all to maybe solve it unless the person realizes they have to solve it. But the bottom line is that we are selling in a way that causes pipelines to clog. It causes sales to slow down. It causes people to doubt us.
Right.
Whereas doing the exact opposite, which is let me listen to you and not try to pitch you or persuade you, but to listen to you and understand, and maybe you'll understand at a deeper level of what you really want, so that you'll have confidence and you'll want to act. So that's my firm belief, and it sounds like it's yours as well. The problem is that we've got people, in management that are push. We got to hit the target. We got to hit the, and all of that, and they don't understand that actually you can get there faster. In fact, I used to say this oftentimes. In fact, I still say it, is that you got to slow down in the beginning in order to speed up at the end. And we do exactly the opposite. We speed up at the beginning to try to get the sale across the line quickly, and let's cut out the little chatter here and let's really get to the meat of the matter. And then it takes forever for the sale to close, you see. So it's the exact opposite of what most people think. And that's where the psychology and understanding that sort of pressure that we feel, that once you understand that and you learn some skills to begin managing that stress, then, that can begin to create a dent. But management has to support that.
Yeah, they talk a good game till the last week of the month comes around.
Yeah.
Which is when you then undermine any sort of connection that you've built with the buyer at that point.
Yeah.
And then we get to sort of, rinse and repeat. But no, I think you're absolutely right. I in my new book coming out in February, I talk about this specifically, about sort of the slow down to speed up, which is that most buyers aren't out looking to make the absolute best decision. They're out looking to make a decision that satisfies their requirements and is sufficient and suffices to help them hit their desired outcomes.
Yeah.
And when they do that, when they find that, then they make the decision.
Right.
So that decision, but if you only happens if you've done, as you've said, is you reach that level of understanding, help the buyer reach that level of understanding, then they understand what that good enough becomes. But if you try to push your way past that, if you try to persuade your way past and pitch your way past that point of understanding, yeah, as you said, then the trust isn't there in order for the customer to make that good enough decision.
Well, and you're guessing. You're guessing at what the problems are. You may know a few of the problems and the markers, but you don't. I was just on the phone actually earlier today with our head of sales, and he was telling me about a deal in Bangladesh he'd been working on, and I told him, I said, Nick, I said that deal, I thought that deal was dead. And he goes, no, it's really alive now, because what's happened is they, during the selling process, they decided they were going to try to, solve it themselves. Mm-hmm. And then which is fine. People want to do that sometimes. And they came back to Nick because they said, look, everything you said came true. Everything you said was going to happen happened. Mm-hmm. And we need to work with you. Well, the only way that could possibly happen is if Nick had spent the time and done the hard yards of listening, learning, putting it together in his head of exactly what the needs are for this client. Would he be able to then lay out a solution that the client would see that was believable, that actually makes sense, and actually they would actually then come back to and say, okay, we're ready to go urgently.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I had numerous examples of that.
Totally, yeah.
Include some in my new book coming up. Is where, especially working as startup selling large, complex, mission critical communications networks, against established players, sometimes against government-owned entities, helping the buyer get to that level of understanding was decisive in winning. Mm-hmm. Because they didn't have trust in everybody else, right? And multiple occasions, the customer, asked the customer afterwards, well, so why'd you make the decision to buy from us? Because we're small, we have no brand name, no track record. Yeah, said, you were the only ones that truly understood what we're trying to accomplish.
That's right. Yeah. Well, really, what you were asking a little while ago is how do you things aren't changing with salespeople. What's that all about? What's really the secret to that? In chapter 5 of the book of Sell Well, Do Good, and also we have it in Decision Intelligence as well, is something called autopilot. Is that it's the way the human mind works. Is we like to automate things and stop thinking deeply, right? And so if you, in fact, we lay out two scenarios. One is for the autopilot for a salesperson, and the other one is the autopilot for the sales manager, and the behaviors that we typically just lock into that then feed other behaviors that are really self-limiting. I won't say necessarily destructive, but at least I'll be kind here and say they're self-limiting. And it's just when people awaken to that, and they all of a sudden they wake up and they realize, wow, I should stop pitching and I should start listening. Now you've broken through some of that autopilot that people just fall into, and into old habits that do not serve people very well. In fact, we even go as far as to say habits are not good things. Oftentimes, it's better to, you don't ever want to go to the point where something becomes, almost unconscious in you, or in fact, unconscious in you. You want to, that's what we call them, practices. It's like a practice is something you choose to do, and you do it on a regular basis. Yeah,
as opposed to training. Yes.
Yeah. So part of this, in working with teams, is we have to work with them about their attitude. In fact, we work in 3 areas. We work in attitude, competence, and their execution of what they're doing. So attitude meaning, how do you keep a positive and possibility type of attitude, taking full responsibility for what you're doing, keeping that expectant attitude in place, and how do you manage your attitude when it takes a dip, like when you get an email or a telephone call or bad news,
Right.
Or you lose a sale. So attitude is critical. And then the second one, which is competence, which is all about selling and, what the methodology is, which is what we're talking about, is that, how do you get people to really listen and learn what the problem is someone has so that you can actually go through a decision intelligence model to take the time to do that. Well, that's a combination between the competence to do that and the attitude to cause you to not rush things, not to push through things too fast, you say. And then the last thing, which is execution, is doing the right things at the right time with the right people. And those three things together, the attitude, competence, and execution, are what drive the size of the results that you're going to get. It's that simple, And if one of those things is off, if attitude is off, or competence is off, or execution is off, it's less than what it could be, then the results are going to reflect that, you say. So,
I think you're right. I couldn't agree more. We're in violent agreement, like we were the first time you were on the show.
Yep.
But I think that attitude, I might relabel that a little bit different, is or maybe include as part of that. It's really this perspective, and you touched on it earlier. As a salesperson, what do you think your job is?
Sure. Yeah.
And if you think your job is to persuade or convince somebody to buy your product, then, which is what I'm sure 98% of sellers think that is, then you're starting off on the wrong path.
Yeah.
And I think until we can change that, right? I mean, I believe that selling is very simply, and we've sort of again touched on it earlier, is your job as a seller is to listen, to understand what the most important thing is to the buyer, and then help them get that. It's that simple. That's your job.
Yeah.
But if sellers started off every day thinking, my job is just I'm going to have conversations, I'm going to listen to truly understand what's the most important thing to that buyer, then put together a plan to help them get that, that's a whole different mindset you come out. And that's that forms every action you take. Then if you think my job is sort of this panic-induced, I have to be pushy and persuasive to get you to buy my product.
Well, with decision intelligence, we say that what the decision intelligence or DQ seller is committed to is not, they're not committed to pitch, persuade, and close the deal. What they're committed to is helping the buyer make the best possible decision that benefits them.
Yep.
And if I sell in that way, I'm going to sell plenty. I'm going to be in the top levels and the top echelons of sales. And so fundamentally, it's my job to pitch, persuade, and get them to buy, or it's my job to help them make the best decision possible, to give them the information, give them an experience where they can then get to the end of that experience and know what to do. All of a sudden, that's a very different experience. It's a very different buying experience, and I got to tell you, Andy, it's a very different seller's experience. I mean, when I started selling in this way about 30 years ago, all of a sudden, sales lost all the fear that I used to have. It lost all the pressure. I stopped feeling the pressure. I stopped feeling the anxiety of, oh my God, am I going to be on the scoreboard today or not?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, really, it's all really over there now. You say it's all over with the buyer. You say, and it's the buyer's process. It's not me as the seller's process. And oftentimes, when we work with organizations that are like in the B2B arena, is we're helping them to retool or rethink how they actually set up their CRM, because the CRM is all their own selling process, from their perspective. And we teach people, actually, this is in Decision Intelligence, the first book, where it's the 10 or 12 steps that you want to bake into your into your CRM, which is all from the buyer's perspective.
Exactly.
And so those are the steps you take. Those are the steps you follow. And you can have your own internal processes that map out against what the ideal buying process is. But, it's really you focus on what is the buyer doing. When I offer the meeting, are they taking it? If not, why not? What's happening over there? Inquire. So tell me, I mean, you want to think about it for a while. Okay, well, tell me a bit more about that. Now you inquire. You're trying to find out what's blocking them. Simple. And then you try to help them solve it, you say. So anyway, I find selling in this way, and I suspect, not that you call it DQ selling, but I would suspect that you probably sell in a very similar way, and that is to to really give people the room they need in order to understand what it is they need, what they then want, and then why from you. That's for sure.
Right. But giving people the room is not antithetical to delivering on your numbers in the time frame you need to deliver them. And
Totally.
and what we see increasingly in B2B selling are these, huge requirements on sellers to have, multiples of their monthly number in their pipeline.
Yeah.
The presumption being that they're not going to close a very high fraction of them, so let's load it up. And I typically I went back and started calculating, looking at some old reports. It's about 5 or 6 years ago I did it, but it's like, I usually ran 1.7 pipeline coverage on big deals for startups where we had to bring them in.
Mm-hmm.
You did.
Yeah.
Because you're selling in a way that enabled the buyer to make the right choice.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think that's something that executives, I think, that are the people who, are the senior managers, have to be brave, be a little brave here, and hold their breath a little bit.
100%.
And give those sales good. And this is the thing we love about what we do is when we find really outstanding leaders. It's like in our first book when we talked about Colin Annett and Mark Campbell and Mark Jopling and other people who are just outstanding leaders. These are people who were working in very large, multi-billion-dollar companies, and they were senior enough and brave enough that they could carve out enough space for their teams to have them learn how to sell in a way that was very different than the rest of the company, and yet they could protect, them from them coming in and doing anything silly.
Right.
So anyway, we were delighted to be able to have people like that featured in our first book. I think our second book here is we've got I think 21 different interviews of people that are amazing social entrepreneurs. And what's really interesting about this whole thing, Andy, is that we find this is really a dichotomy here. If you take a look at selling in the developing world, what you might call the emerging or frontier markets, and then selling over here. Someone is really trying to reach me here. There you go. Turn that off. But to be able to look at the developing world and then look at the commercial sort of Western selling world, and to think, okay, how in the world can you operate in both of those worlds? They're so different. And I'm here to tell you, you know what? They're not. They may speak a different language. They look a bit different. They may be buying something that's $20 or $200 versus $200,000 or $20 million, but the process is the same.
Yep.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Amazing to me.
People are people.
And people are people.
And there's, so our last point is just, you read much of literature, they want to have you believe that obviously our world continues to change. It changes quickly. The impact of technology is extreme. But there are people who want to have you believe that as humans, we've evolved over the last 20 years. The way we process information, the way we make decisions. And, those take tens of thousands of years. Not tens of years. So,
Well, all the tools that are available to salespeople today. I mean, I'm afraid that it's really, I don't think they're being used well in the sense, that, and it's a whole other topic. We could talk a long time, but bottom line is that we need to equip people to be great at communicating with other people, and that's not about technology, although technology can support that. It's really about people talking to people, and this goes right up into management too. So how does a sales manager manage the sales team? Well, today it's a lot different than it was when I was a sales guy way back 40 years ago, where there was a lot more of a human touch or human. And I do think that's a huge thing that's missing, from sales organizations, is that real human-centered approach not only to selling but also to managing.
Couldn't agree more. But the people that are successful are those who are doing it.
Totally, absolutely.
Oh, and this is part of the message we're trying to get out is that yeah, maybe the exception these days of people who act that way, managers, sales leaders, individual contributors, but they are the ones who are most consistently successul.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah. They buck the system. They resist doing what the sheep are doing in a way.
Yeah, which is one of the themes of my new book. So,
brilliant! I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, well, we'll make sure you get an early copy.
Thank you.
All right, Scott. Thank you so much for joining me. Pleasure as always.
Thank you.
People want to connect with you. What's the best way to do that?
Well, they can go to our website, which is wrpartnership.com. We've got our 2 books that are out also that are advertised on there as well. They can go and find our books on Amazon, Decision Intelligence Selling and Sell Well, Do Good. And all the contact details are in there as well. So,
all right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All the best, Andy.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I am so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Scott Roy, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for your help with that. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.